Okay, hello everybody. So this is our third lesson here with Ataturk University. My name is Dr. Sahar Khamis. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Maryland, College Park, and I'm an Erasmus visiting scholar with the Faculty of Communication here at Ataturk University. And I did give some lectures before with the Department of Journalism and also with the Department of Public Relations. And today the lecture is with the Department of Radio and Television. So I will talk a little bit, give a chance for translation. Muhammad Atallah, kindly translate what I just said. And as I go about giving my lecture, also every once in a while, I will stop and ask you to translate to the rest of the group, please, to make sure everybody understands exactly what I'm saying. So Muhammad, can you please translate what I just said now?
Yes, good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon.
How are you?
Thank you. Doing well, thank you.
Okay. Professor Sahar ABD, Amerika'dan, Maryland Üniversitesi'nden doçent doktor olarak çalışmakta. Kendisi gazetecilik, halkla ilişkiler bölümünde ders verdi. Şey olarak, doçent doktor olarak. Bugün de bizimle olacak.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to start by talking about how the field of radio and television, or the field of mainstream media in general, has actually been changing in recent years. What are some of the most important changes or developments that have been taking place in the field or the area of radio and television and the area of mainstream media in general? How has that been evolving and how it has been changing? So Muhammad?
Yes, bugünkü konumuz yani ana akım medya, yani radyo, televizyonlarda önemli değişiklikler gelmiştir. Bir de bu değişiklikler nasıl geldi, bunlarla ilgili bugün anlatacağım.
Right. So I will start by talking about what we all know as the direct effect model, or the linear model of communication that I'm sure we all studied, which says that communication travels in a straight line from the sender of the message or the creator of the message. This person or this particular sender or this particular source will create a certain message, and then this message is going to travel in a certain channel or medium to reach the audience, and then the audience is going to give certain reaction or certain feedback to go back again to the creator or to the source of the message. We call this the traditional or the linear form of communication, the traditional linear communication model. So this is what we have been studying in the field of communication originally or in the past. Muhammad?
Normalde bir etki modeli var. Direkt etki model olarak söyleniyor. Bir mesaj üretici oluyor bir taraftan. Mesaj üretip bir kanal ile alıcılara gönderiliyor. Bir de alıcılar geri bildirim sağlayabiliyor. Bunu direkt etki model olarak söyleniyor. Bir de direkt etki yapabiliyor. Bu geleneksel bir şeydir, modeldir.
Thank you. Now, this traditional model of communication has been shifting and has been changing in recent years. We are not seeing this linear, direct model of communication in effect in many parts of the world. What we are seeing now with the introduction of the internet, social media, and digital media, we are seeing a different and a new model of communication, which is much more circular rather than linear. It is much more circular. What do I mean by that? I mean that the sender is also in many cases the receiver, and the receiver is in many cases the sender, because we are now seeing more of citizen journalism. That means that many people are not just senders of messages, they're also creators and producers of messages. So in other words, you are not just sitting there and waiting to read this article or to see this particular show, and you are just the audience or you are just the receiver. In many cases, you are both the sender and the receiver, the consumer and the producer at the same time. This is why I'm saying we are shifting from the linear direct model of communication, the traditional one, into a much more circular form of communication. Mohammed?
Geleneksel model, bu etki model artık değişiyor. Yani dijital model de yani sosyal medyada bu daha çok yuvarlak, yani artık geleneksel model gibi değil. Sadece mesaj gönderici gönderiyor, alıcı sadece mesajı alıyor. O şekilde değil artık. Gönderici de alıcı olabiliyor, alıcı da gönderici olabiliyor. Yani ikisi olabiliyor. Bu daha etkili.
Exactly. Now, like everything else in life, right, citizen journalism, which is the new form of communication, of course, does have its own pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages. We cannot think of citizen journalism as just a completely 100% great and positive thing. Like everything else in life, it does have its pros and cons, good sides, bad sides, advantages, and disadvantages. So I'll start first by talking about the advantages or the positive points, and then we'll talk about some of the disadvantages or some of the negative points as well. So the positive points are, of course, the audience now can become creators of messages. They become more active. They become more interactive. They become more participatory. And these are all very important and very positive things. Mohammed?
Citizen journalism yani yurttaş gazetecilik, bunun iki tarafı var. Pozitif ve negatif iki tarafı var. Pozitif olarak yani kendisi istediği gibi şey yapabiliyor, içerik üretebiliyor, bir de gönderebiliyor. Bir de ikisi olabiliyor, hem gönderici hem alıcı. İkisi bir de etkileşim konusunda daha çok sağlıklı olabiliyor.
Exactly. Other advantages or positive points about citizen journalism has also been increasing the margin of freedom and increasing the margin of freedom of expression and freedom of the press, which means that these voices of average people or average citizens could be heard without necessarily having total or complete governmental control, which was the case in most of the mainstream media and remains to be the case about most of the mainstream media in many parts of the world. So citizen journalism gives you more margin of freedom and gives you more margin of different voices, more plural voices, more interactive voices, and more plurality, diversity, and also escape from the complete or total control of governments on the media. Mohammed?
Yurttaş gazetecilik artık artıyor. Yani özgürlük da artıyor yurttaş gazetecilik kullanarak. Çünkü geleneksel medyanın bir limiti var. Yani herkese ulaşmayabiliyor. Bu yüzden yurttaş gazetecilikte herkes ses verebiliyor. Bir de ulaşabiliyor yani.
Right. However, as I said before, there are positive and there are negative sides, good sides and bad sides to every phenomena. Citizen journalism is no exception. So some of the negative sides or negative aspects of citizen journalism have been the fact that you cannot always double check the facts in every single story, because the citizen journalists are not professional journalists. They are not necessarily trained professionally to be professional journalists. They're just average, ordinary people, right? So in many cases, what happens is there may be true information or there may be untrue information or false information. That's why we talk about the age of misinformation or the age of disinformation, which means that you can also have fake news, or you can have lies, or you can have information which is not correct or not accurate, also spreading through social media in the age of citizen journalism. Mohammed?
Yurttaş gazeteciliğin iki tarafı var. Yani pozitif ve negatif tarafı. negatif olarak yani yurttaş gazetecilikte içeriği kontrol etmiyor. Yani profesyonel gazeteci olmadığı için içeriği çok kontrol etmiyor. Bu yüzden sahte haber yani yalan haber paylaşabiliyor. Bu bir olumsuz bir taraftır.
Right. And therefore, it's very important for us in the age of citizen journalism to double check the information, to make sure that the information is correct, to make sure that the information is accurate. And the best way to do that is to actually double check from more than one source. Don't get your information or your news from just one single source. You cannot just say, oh, I read this story online or I saw this on this particular, a website. You have to double check the accuracy of the information. You have to make sure you compare and contrast the information and the news that you are getting from more than one source to make sure it is correct and to overcome the problem of misinformation and disinformation. Mohammed?
Yurttaş gazetecilikte kontrol çok önemlidir. Yani herhangi bir haber için çift kontrol çok önemli. Doğru bilgi mi paylaşılıyor yoksa yanlış mı, yalan mı bunu kontrol etmek çok önemlidir. Bu yüzden bu haberlerin bir kaynak olması gerek. Yani kaynak sadece internet olmaz. Yani doğru bir kaynak olması çok önemlidir.
Right. We also need to practice and to master something which is called media literacy. Media literacy means the skills of being able to distinguish between bad and good media content, accurate and inaccurate media content, the correct and factual information which is credible and trustworthy, and that which is fake or which is inaccurate, or that which is simply misinformation and disinformation. So having media literacy skills is a very, very important thing. And in my opinion, we need to teach media literacy courses, not just in the higher education or university level, but I would say even in the elementary, middle school, and high school level as well. Mohammed?
Bu şeyleri fark etmek yani hangisi doğru haber, hangisi yanlış haber bunun üzerinde pratik yapmak çok önemlidir yani. Bunu medya okuryazarlık olarak söyleniyor. Medya okuryazarlık çok önemli. Çünkü okuryazarlık olursa o zaman insan fark edebilir hangisi doğru, hangisi yanlış ya da hangisi yalan haber. Bu yüzden bu medya okuryazarlık eğitimin her seviyede olması lazım. Yani sadece üniversite değil, yani ortaokul, liselerde de olabilir bu medya okuryazarlık eğitimi.
Thank you. And also another issue we have to talk about, which is very important, is the increased polarization and fragmentation and division in the age of citizen journalism. In my first book, Islam.com, myself and my co-author, we talked about the problem of echo chambers. By echo chambers, I mean when people live in their own isolated islands and they just live inside their own bubbles. So in other words, if you are using, for example, liberal media, you become only confined or only limited to this particular type of media, and you follow people in the same type, in the same category. You don't listen to other views and you don't get exposed to other opinions. And the same for people, for example, in a conservative side of the argument or the conservative side of politics. They don't interact with you and they don't share or hear your views. That means that social media, new media, and citizen journalism in this case is increasing, not decreasing, the problem of polarization, fragmentation, and division, because people are becoming more polarized and more divided in the age of citizen journalism. Mohammed?
Başka bir şey çok önemli değil. Yani polarizasyon olarak söylüyor. Yani tek taraflı olmak yani. Bunu echo chamber olarak söylüyor. Echo chamber yani kendi ayrı bir ada ya da ayrı bir dünyada yaşamak yani. Başkalarının görüşleri kabul etmiyor bu tür insanlar. Muhafazakar insanlar olabilir. Dinle ilgili olabilir ya da siyasi görüşle ilgili olabilir. Bu tür insanlar başka görüşleri hiç kabul etmiyor kendi görüşüne göre. devam ediyor. Bu yüzden ayrı ayrı görüşler olabiliyor.
Right. And also two other things we have to bear in mind in these new changes, that they're really impacting and affecting also the mainstream media, because in many cases, bloggers and activists and citizen journalists, they are much more bold and much more courageous and brave. So they can talk about issues which used to be a taboo in the past. People did not talk about them in the past. Whether they're talking about, for example, criticizing the government or criticizing the regime, or whether they're talking about very sensitive issues like domestic violence or even sexual harassment. All of these issues are very sensitive issues. The mainstream media did not, in many countries, especially in dictatorial regimes or repressive regimes, people are afraid to talk about these taboo issues. They don't talk about the politically sensitive issues like criticizing the regime or the government, and they don't talk about socially sensitive issues like sexual harassment or domestic violence or discrimination based on gender. But when the citizen journalists start to talk about these issues and to break these taboos, they somehow encourage the mainstream media to actually break the barrier of fear and to start to talk about these issues and to tackle these issues as well. Mohammed?
Geleneksel medyanın bir limiti var. Mesela geleneksel medya iktidara karşı çok eleştiremiyor. Bazı ülkelerde çok şey oluyor, yani limiti var. Ama yeni medya bunlara karşı şey yapabiliyor, yani karşı durabiliyor, eleştirebiliyor. Diktatora karşı, başka şeylere karşı, haksızlıklara karşı şey yapabiliyor, protesto edebiliyor. Bu diktatör olsun, demokrasi olsun, yasa cinsel taciz olsun. Bunlarla ilgili geleneksel medya yani birçok ülkede susuyor. Ama yeni medya bunlarla ilgili görüş bildirim için, protesto yapmak için güzel bir alandır.
We call this the spillover effect, the spillover effect from the realm of online journalism or citizen journalism into the realm of mainstream media, which of course means that you can push the boundaries. You can push the boundaries for the the mainstream media. In many cases, the mainstream media will have to tackle these sensitive issues or talk about these sensitive political and social issues that they did not dare to talk about in the past, right? So in the past, they were shying away from these issues. They did not talk about these issues, but because of the spillover effect from the realm of citizen journalism into the realm of mainstream media, the mainstream media are now encouraged, or in some cases, they have to also talk about some of these sensitive issues that they did not talk about or discuss in the past. Mohammed?
Online gazetecilik, yurttaş gazetecilik aslında geleneksel medyada olan bir duvar, yani limiti aşabiliyor. Normalde ana akım medyada hassas konularda şey yapamıyor, yani protesto edemiyor, bazı konularda problem oluyor. Ama online gazetecilik, yurttaş gazetecilik bu limitleri aşıp herhangi bir hassas konuyla ilgili şey yapabiliyor, paylaşım yapabiliyor.
Right. And also another important thing we have to remember with the shift to citizen journalism is the fact that there is also a shift in terms of sources of funding and sponsorship. Traditional media or mainstream media, most of them got their funding from the governments, officially controlled and officially funded media, right? In many countries, this is the case. And of course, it becomes much more the case in regimes or countries or governments which have less press freedom. When you move to the realm of online journalism or citizen journalism, there is also a shift in the source of funding and the source of sponsorship. So in many cases, you get all of these YouTubers, for example, who are now very popular on social media and new media, and some of these YouTubers become very famous and they start to have, hundreds of thousands of followers, in some cases, millions of followers and viewers, right? And they start sometimes to make revenue or to make money from YouTube or from other social media platforms rather than getting their own funding from the governments or from the regimes in power. Mohammed?
Başka önemli bir konu yani finansı edilmek ya da sponsor yapmaktır yani. Normal ana akım medyalar iktidar tarafından ya da başka bir güç tarafından finanse ediliyor, sponsor ediliyor. Bu yüzden onlar yapamıyor, çok özgür olamıyor. Ama sosyal medyada bu limiti yok. Yani orada finanse etmek ya da sponsorun bir meselesi yok. Bu yüzden görüyoruz ki YouTube'da yani bir YouTuber şu an binlerce, milyonlarca ya da milyar kadar takipçisi var. Bir de sponsor finans meselesi olmadığı için o şekilde özgürce yapabiliyor, yani haber paylaşabiliyor, ileriye gidebiliyor.
And of course, with the change in the source of funding or the source of sponsorship comes another very important point, which is, as I said before, you have a more bigger margin of freedom and diversity and plurality because you can hear more different voices. You can touch upon taboo issues or sensitive issues. You are not totally under the government control or the government monopoly over the media. Because now you are not getting your funding or your money or your sponsorship from the media, from the government or from the regime. That means that you are able to have a bigger margin of freedom of expression and freedom of the press because you are not relying on the government as your main source of funding or the main source of sponsorship. You are now relying on other sources of funding from YouTube, from other social media platforms. The more followers and the more viewers you're going to have on your page or your account or your YouTube channel, the more revenue you are going to make. So that means you're not depending on the government sponsorship and funding just like you did in the past in the mainstream media. And that means that you can have a bigger margin of freedom of expression and freedom of the press and more diversity and more plurality as well in citizen journalism. Mohammed?
Ana akım medyanın büyük bir problemi vardı. Yani marjin, çerçeve. Yani bir monopoli ediliyordu. İktidar tarafından ya da bir sponsor için finans etmek meselesi vardı. Ama şu an sosyal medyada ana akım medya gibi bu çerçevesi yok. Artık bu çerçeve daha çok geniş. Çünkü o sosyal medya için YouTube kanal ya da Facebook page bunlar için artık bir finans ya da gerek yok, sponsor gerek yok. Bu yüzden daha çok özgür olarak çalışabiliyor. Yani mesela çok takipçi olursa, ne kadar fazla izleyici varsa o şekilde kazanabiliyor. Bu yüzden bu çerçeve daha çok geniş, daha çok özgürdür.
Exactly. Thank you. So the bigger question now is, what about competition, right? In the age of citizen journalism, we can argue that there is more room for competition. So in the past, the mainstream media being mainly controlled and funded, right, by governments or by the regimes, that means that whatever they give you, you have to accept. So the program can be good, the program can be bad, the program can be terrible. You don't have choices. So when I was growing up, for example, in Egypt, I'm originally from Egypt, so I'm Egyptian American, right, from Misr and from America as well. When I was growing up in Egypt, we only had 2 channels on Egyptian TV, Channel 1 and Channel 2. You did not have much of a choice, okay? Either Channel 1 or Channel 2. When you talk about the age of citizen journalism, we are seeing much more diversity because you have, thousands, if not millions, right, of different websites on social media. You have different programs, you have different YouTube channels, you have different Twitter accounts, you have different blogs, and that means more diversity. And it also means more competition. So we should ask ourselves, what is the effect of this competition on the mainstream media? Mohammed?
Şimdi büyük bir soru rekabet. Ana akım medya iktidar tarafından finans ya da sponsor ediliyor diye çok rekabetçi olmuyor. Mesela profesör kendisi Mısır'da sadece 2 kanal var. Kanal 1 ve Kanal 2. Başka bir seçenek yok. Ama sosyal medyada çok seçenek olabiliyor. Yani çeşitli amaçlar için bir kanal ya da page oluşturabiliyor, çeşitli amaç için kullanabiliyor. Burada rekabet de daha çok geniş.
So I would say that the competition does have a positive effect and a positive impact, because what the competition means is that the mainstream media, the mainstream radio and television channels will have to also improve their own quality of programming. They will have to do better. They will have to compete. They will have to perform in a better way and with a better capacity. They have to give you better programs, right? And better content. Because there is now competition, there is now diversity, it is much more diverse, much more pluralistic, right? And that means you have competition, and that means that the competition itself, in my opinion, is going to improve the quality of the programs and the content in mainstream media. Mohammed?
Bu rekabetin önemli bir tarafı var. Çünkü sosyal medyada daha çok rekabet var. Onlar daha çok çeşitli şeyler için, amaçlar için kullanılıyor. Bu yüzden ana akım medyada bu sosyal medya ile yani online gazetecilik ile rekabet etmek için kendi programlarını ya da kendi içeriklerini kaliteli yapmak zorunda. Bu ana akım medya ile yeni medyanın bir rekabettir. Bu rekabet ana akım medya kendisine de bir değişiklik yapmak zorunda kalıyor, kalitesini geliştirmek zorunda kalıyor.
Thank you. And we also have to ask a very important question. Does this shift to citizen journalism and online space and digital media and social media means that mainstream media is going to be dead? I always get asked the question, does that mean the end of newspapers, the end of television, the end of radio? And my answer is always no, because these mainstream media can always reinvent themselves. They can always create themselves again in a different form. For example, you can have the newspaper in the traditional way, right? You hold the newspaper in your hand, right? Maybe your grandparents or your parents are still very much receiving the daily, newspaper as a hard copy, not online. But also the newspaper is changing itself. It is becoming more electronic, like a digital or electronic form of media or form of journalism, which is available online. The same thing about radio. You can have the podcast, right? So the podcast is available for you on digital media and on social media. So it's not about the end of mainstream media. It's about the ability of the mainstream media to reinvent themselves again and to try to produce their own content in a different way and on different platforms. Mohammed?
Şimdi başka bir soru, bu online gazetecilik ya da yurttaş gazetecilik, bunlardan dolayı ana akım medya sona erecek mi? Yani mesela basın gazete bunlar kalacak mı yoksa sona erecek mi? Bu büyük bir sorudur. Cevap olarak hayır, bunlar sona ermeyecek. Çünkü gazete mesela okumak daha kolay, yani yaşlı insanlar, yani yaşlı insanlar bunları daha kolay okuyabiliyor. Bir de yeni medya ile yapmak için, rekabet etmek için yeni içerik oluşturmak, yani yeni bir versiyon oluşturmak zorunda. Yani o şekilde ana akım medyalar kalacaktır, yani sona ermeyecek.
Thank you. Also, two of the other things we have to really talk about, and it's very important, is also how citizen journalism or the shift to online communication, online media, and citizen journalism can also impact the way that mainstream media is doing its own work or performing, right? One of the things we talked about on the first lecture, the first day, was the problem or the issue of Islamophobia. What is Islamophobia? How do you define it? This irrational fear of Islam and Muslims. We talked about the problem of Islamophobia, how social media can increase, but also how it can fight Islamophobia. I think that, for example, now we can talk about, because there is citizen journalism, because you are having more views, because you are having more opinions, maybe we can shift away from the problem of quote unquote, when it bleeds, it leads, right? We talked about that before, meaning whenever you have only conflict, war, bloodshed, destruction, all of these tensions, that's when the media is interested. So maybe in citizen journalism, you are seeing a different type of content. It's not just about conflict and wars and people are fighting each other or attacking each other or being in conflict, but you can also see other types of content as well. Maybe interfaith dialogue, interfaith friendships, cultural exposure to different types of cultures, different types of stories, different types of content. So maybe this surge or this increase in citizen journalism can help to also overcome the problem of when it bleeds, it leads, which means that the mainstream media has a big focus on conflicts and bloodshed and war. Maybe with the shift to citizen journalism, we can overcome a big part of this problem. Mohammed?
Önceki derste anlattığı gibi bir problem, bir de çözüm var. Yani sosyal medya mesela bir taraftan İslamofobi artıyor, diğer taraftan da bunu çözmek için buna karşı savaşabiliyor yani. Bu yüzden sosyal medya sadece yani savaş, kavga ya da kan şeylerle ilgili şey yapacak konu olacak değil. Başka içerikler olabiliyor, mesela kültürel şeyler olabiliyor, başka ülke, başka kültür, başka problem, bir de bunların çözümle ilgili da sosyal medya çalışabiliyor.
Right, thank you. Another problem that also citizen journalism can help us to overcome is the problem of stereotyping. We talked before about this problem of stereotyping and creating negative images and negative stereotypes, right? When we were talking about the problem of Islamophobia and how, for example, if a person with an Arab name or a Muslim name commits a crime, there is a 300% more chance that this person's image is going to be all over the media and it's going to be linked to his name and to his identity, to his nationality, and to his religion, right? So maybe that the existence of citizen journalism and online journalism would hopefully mean that we will have less of this stereotyping and the ability for you to check, as I said, from more than hundreds of thousands, if not millions of different websites and sources. Hopefully that's also going to decrease the problem of negative images and stereotypes as well. Mohammed?
Sosyal medyanın başka bir sebep var. Stereotipi yani sıradan bir düşünce için ona karşı bozabiliyor. Yani toplumun her zamanki düşünceyi bozabilir, yeni bir düşünce oluşturabilir. Mesela İslamofobi. İslamofobi yani Müslümanları grup böyle kötü başka şeyler kimlik verebiliyor yani İslamofobide. Online gazetecilik ve yurttaş gazetecilik sayesinde bu stereotipi karşı yani geleneksel bir düşünceye karşı durabiliyor. Bir de yeni bir imaj oluşturabiliyor.
Right. So I want you to think about all of these positives and negatives, the good sides and the bad sides of citizen journalism and how it is impacting the performance of mainstream media, including mainstream radio and television channels and newspapers, of course. I'll stop here and I'll be happy to take your questions and to have a discussion in the questions and answers. Feel free to ask in any language you like. You can ask in Turkish or English. If you want to ask in Arabic as well, I'm fine with that. And we have Mohammed who can hopefully also help us with the translation of the questions and answers as well. Mohammed?
Bugünkü derste anlattığı şeyler yani sosyal medyanın pozitif ve negatif şeyler ana akım medyayı nasıl etkileyebiliyor? Pozitif etkileyebiliyor yani ana akım medya, sosyal medya. Bu ders bunlarla ilgiliydi. Sizin bir sorunuz varsa sorabilirsiniz. Türkçe olsun, İngilizce, Arapça fark etmiyor. Sorunuzu sorabilirsiniz.
Okay, so we can start taking your questions, please. If you have any questions, don't hesitate. I did already see some questions in the chat box. So Mohammed, maybe you can read one of the questions, please.
Okay. Elif Ezgi, Shirai. Hello, I'm Elif Ezgi, Yurtsever. I have a few questions for you. Are you satisfied with the current state of mass communication? How do you think mass communication should be? Thank you. Do you support citizen journalism?
Thank you, Alif, for the good questions. I think when we talk about mass communication in general, we have to be specific, right? Like what kind of mass communication and in which country, when, where, and how. These are very important questions to ask because obviously, for example, mass communication in a country like the United States will be very different from some countries in Europe, will be very different from a country like Turkey, will be very different from a country like Egypt, and so on. So we have to talk about, when we say the word the status of mass communication today, we have to be very specific as to which country we are talking about because of these different media systems. Muhammad?
Kitle iletişimle ilgili yani hangi tipi olmalı, hangi ülkede bu belli olmalı? Yani Amerika'daki kitle iletişim farklı, bir de Türkiye'deki kitle iletişim farklı. Bu yüzden hangi ülkede olduğuna dair belirli olmalı.
Right. And as for my satisfaction with citizen journalism, I think citizen journalism is indeed a very, very important change, as I said in my lecture today. It brought about so many significant and important changes in the field of media and the field of communication. We have to think about the importance and the significance of all of these changes. And as I said in my lecture, we cannot think about it in terms of black and white, good or bad. We have to understand the mixed effect because you do have both positives and negatives, but overall or in general, I think that citizen journalism is very much the future of mass communication, which is why the mainstream media are now reinventing themselves in new forms, like I said in my lecture, like more digital, more online, more electronic, to be able to reach a more wide and diverse audience. So I think citizen journalism is indeed the future of communication. Mohammed?
Yurttaş gazetecilikle ilgili yurttaş gazetecilik çok önemli bir değişiklikler getirmişti. Yani derste anlamak için pozitif ve negatif taraflardan bahsetti ama sadece negatif değil, pozitif taraflar var. Kendim de bunları savunuyorum, online gazetecilik ve yurttaş gazeteciliği. Çünkü bunlar bu gazetecilik çok fazla fırsat veriyor, geniş alan veriyor. Bir de önemli değişiklikler için çalışabiliyor.
Right, exactly. Thank you. Can we take another question, please? Mohammed, can you check if there are other questions in the chat box, please?
No, there is no question.
Okay. Can I get questions from the? Thank you, Alif. Thank you so much. Thank you. Can I get other questions from the audience, please? Don't be shy. Ask in any language you like. More questions? Because you people are in the Department of Television and Radio. So if you have specific questions about television and radio, maybe questions related to television and radio in the United States, how it's different, for example, from, let's say, other parts of the world, I'd be happy to answer that as well. Any questions?
Professor, I have a question.
Please, Mohammed.
That we know that new journalism, citizen journalism, those are related with the technology. So technology development is first necessary to get, for example, to get widespread, to reach the audience. For example, there is some difference. It means we say it is technological lags or cultural lag. It means some people, they cannot get, for example, mobile phone, so they cannot read the online newspaper, even they don't use social media. So how can online journalism or social media can include those people, and how it could be mass communication? Because there is a controversy that new media, it means social media or online guys, it's not a mass communication.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I will answer the question and then please translate your question and my answer to the audience, okay? So what Mohammed is referring to here, in my opinion, is called the digital divide or the digital gap, right? Which is the difference between those who have access to 24/7 high-speed internet. They have the digital literacy skills. They have access to fast internet connection. They also have the skills to be able to use the internet, and those who don't. And we cannot assume that everyone in the world has the same digital literacy skills or the same infrastructure or the same ability to use the internet 24/7 with the same speed and the same efficiency. That is not true, and it's not the case, right? So we have to also understand that as much as we are very, passionate and very happy and excited about citizen journalism and online communication and digital media, indeed, you do have some barriers and you do have some limitations. And some of these limitations are more so in the case of, for example, less developed countries where you have problems. You have problems with the economy, you have problems with politics, you have problems with the governments, you have problems with infrastructure, and you have problems with digital literacy and the availability of technology. So all of these can create barriers when it comes to trying to reach a very large audience, which is why I said in my lecture, we cannot say that mainstream media is dead. I always get asked the question, oh, do you think that now because we have the internet and social media and citizen journalism, this is the end of mainstream, media? I say no. We have to still understand that, there's still a very big audience that's going to be, pretty much, following the news on television and reading the newspaper, even in the hard copy format, right? So there are generational differences, technological differences, infrastructural differences. All of these are very important things to keep in mind. And we have to address this digital divide or this digital gap, which is something we have to bear in mind when we talk about the future of mass communication. I know this is a long answer, so good luck to you, Mohammed, trying to translate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can you translate your question and my answer, please?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Şimdi şeyle ilgili söyledim de dijital yani online gazetecilik, yurttaş gazetecilikle ilgili söyledim. Yani teknoloji olan, yani cep telefonu olan insanlar bunlardan faydalanabiliyor. Ama teknoloji olmayan insanlar bunlara nasıl şey yapacak, yani dahil edecek? O zaman bu kitle iletişim nasıl olabilir? Sorun buydu. Bunun cevap olarak da profesör dijital ayrımcılık ile ilgili şeyden bahsetti. Dijital fark, yani gelişmiş ülkedeki insanlar daha çok şey kullanabiliyor, teknoloji kullanabiliyor. Bu yüzden onlar medya, sosyal medya, yani online gazeteciliklerden de daha çok faydalanabiliyor. Ama üçüncü dünya ülke ya da gelişmemiş ülkelerdeki insanlar bu arada teknolojik şeyden dolayı ya da tema olmadığı için geride kalıyor. Bu yüzden yani kendisi de söyledi, yani şey için ana akım medya sona ermeyecek, yani kalacak. Bu ayrımcılık, yani dijital ayrımcılıktan dolayı ana akım medya kalacak. Sosyal medya, yani online gazetecilik tamamen şey yapmayacak, yani herkesi dahil edemez. Bu yüzden dijital ana akım medyada kalacak, yani insanlar televizyon izleyecek, gazete okuyacak, bu şekilde ilerleyecek.
Very good, thank you. I think I saw a question from Elif in the chat box, and I think the question was, how can social media be organized? Correct, Mohammed?
Yes.
Okay, so I think what Elif is talking about here is what is called internet regulation, right? Internet, I always get asked the question, right? How can we possibly regulate the internet? It's a very big question. And unfortunately, until this moment, we're speaking now, until this very moment, there is no easy answer to this question. Why? Because the whole issue of internet regulation is a very complex, very difficult, and very tricky issue. Every time you talk about regulation, it means you can very well invite the regimes or the governments which can put more restrictions on freedom of expression or freedom of the press. And that is something that, of course, journalists and ordinary people, average citizens, are afraid and worried about. They're afraid and worried about the government regulation. At the same time, as parents and grandparents and educators and teachers and mothers and fathers and so on, we're also worried about the effect of the internet and social media, especially on young people, on children, teenagers, and the new generation, because you can have things like violence, pornography, sex trafficking or human trafficking. You can have so many different problems. Extremist or terrorist groups sometimes also try to recruit young people through the internet and through social media. So we have to be very careful, right? But at the same time, there is no easy answer, because every time you raise the issue of quote unquote internet regulation or social media regulation, you always get this fear of more repression or more dictatorship or more interference from the government. At the same time, if you leave it completely open and completely unregulated, you have all of these dangers and all of these harms that can happen on social media as well. So I think we will need to reach a point of balance where we try to weigh, right, the pros and cons, or the positive and negative of citizen journalism and of the online sphere, in order to be able to overcome some of these harms and some of these dangers without cutting the freedom of expression in a healthy or positive way. Mohammed?
Evet, elefanımın sorusu vardı. Nasıl daha organize olabilir, düzenli olabilir sosyal medya? Bununla ilgili cevap olarak söyledi. Bu daha düzenli olabilir ama internet yasa getirerek değil, internet ya da online ya da sosyal medya yasa getirerek değil. Bunları getiriyorsa o zaman iktidar için daha çok avantajlı olur. Yani daha çok diktatör olarak bunları kullanabilir. Bu yüzden baskı daha çok artabilir. Bu yüzden ne olabilir? Kendisinden kontrol edebilir yani. Aileden bir kontrol olabilir sosyal medya kullanmak için, internet online kullanmak için. Sosyal medyanın iki tarafı var, olumlu ve olumsuz. Bu yüzden olumsuz tarafları yapmadan, taraflardan zarar almadan olumlu tarafları nasıl kullanabilir? Bu kendisinden olabilir, bir de aileden olabilir.
Right, thank you. I think Elif has one more question in the chat box. Mohammed, can you read it, please?
Yes. Thank you for holding this meeting. How should, okay, this is gone. The world, I have one last question. The world is full of information, information pollution. So communicators should do what?
Yes, there is actually the problem of information overload and information pollution, right? So information overload means you are bombarded with too much information, a lot of information. Sometimes you get all of these spam, spam messages or spam, emails, and not everything you are receiving is necessarily useful or important. Sometimes not only is it of information overload, you also have the information pollution, which is the problem of inaccurate or false or fake news and fake information. We were talking about it earlier when we talked about misinformation and disinformation. Unfortunately, in the age of the internet and the age of social media, there is always a greater risk and a greater chance that you're going to get more information overload as well as more information pollution, right? And that's why, as I said before, it is very important to master digital literacy skills, meaning to be able to know how to distinguish between good and bad content on the internet and social media, what is accurate, what is inaccurate, what is considered credible information or factual information, and what is considered fake news or misinformation or disinformation. This will never happen unless we master the skills of media literacy, which is why, as I said before, it's very important to start this media literacy, not from the higher education level, but even from the school, elementary, middle school, and high school. We need to master these media literacy skills and to teach them to young people, because I see now young people, I even see young children, at the age of 2 and 3 and 4, holding their own tablets, and holding, sometimes little, iPads, and they're not making eye contact, they're not looking at their parents, they're not looking at the teachers, they're just looking at their own tablets and their own devices, right? So we have to really kind of teach this media literacy skills from a very young age in order to be able to overcome the problems of the communication or information pollution and the spread of misinformation, disinformation, and other types of also dangers and harms that we talked about before. Mohammed?
Soru bilgi kirliliğiydi. Çok bilgi kirliliği var yani internette. Yalan, dolan, sahte bilgiler var. Bir de çok fazla bilgi mevcuttur internette. Bu yüzden internette bir risk var her zaman. Biri fazla bilgi, diğeri ise bilgi kirliliği. Bu yüzden medya okuryazarlık çok önemlidir. Yani olması lazım. Medya okuryazarlık varsa bir kişide o kişi ayrım yapabiliyor. Hangi haber doğru, hangisi yanlış ya da yalan. Bu yüzden bu medya okuryazarlık çok önemli. Medya okuryazarlık sadece yüksek eğitimde olacak değil. Yani orta eğitimde olabilir, lisede olabilir, ilk şeyde okulda olabilir. O şekilde medya okuryazarlık yani getirebilir.
Very good, thank you. Okay, other questions from the audience, please?
So, Professor, I have a question about this internet regulation.
Yes.
In my country, in Bangladesh, recently government passed a new bill. It is about Digital Security Act. So, in this act, it is very much terrible for free opinion, freedom of speech, even for investigative journalism, everything. In this regulation, we can see that anything, for example, criticism of government, anything you can, if you say online, they can arrest. Even the punishment is higher than normal crime. It means even the fine is very high. So it is we are suffering. So what could be the alternative of this Digital Security Act for the freedom of speech? Actually, ruling party they don't want, they want to stop always, as you know, the situation is Egypt. But as fair, for example, for media personalities, for journalists, media worker, what they can do to remove this Security Act to establish the freedom of journalism and freedom of media.
Thank you. The situation you are describing, Mohammed, is very similar to what we have in the Arab world. There are now what is called cybercrime laws. And the cybercrime laws are also imposed in a number of Arab countries, including Egypt, which is where I come from, and a number of other Arab countries. They have these cybercrime laws, which, as I said before, can always introduce the danger of curbing, as you said, exactly as you described just now, curbing or cutting or decreasing the amount of freedom of expression and freedom of the press. You cannot open your mouth. If you can go to jail because you sent a tweet that the government does not like, or the government thinks that you are being critical of the government. You can go to jail just because you sent a tweet that they don't like, or something that you put on Facebook, a Facebook post or a blog post. I always tell my students in the United States and America, you are so lucky. You don't know how lucky you are, because in many parts of the world, there isn't this margin of freedom of the press and freedom of expression and democracy that you enjoy in the United States. But the answer, I think, to the question of what can be done about these types of digital laws or cybercrime laws and so on, I think that there's a need for professional regulation, like the journalists, the media people, the editors, those who work in the field of journalism. They should say, okay, now we have the digital space. We don't want the government to be dictating the rules. We don't want the government to be stepping in and saying, okay, we're going to arrest you if you do this and that. Let's make the professional associations, like the journalist syndicates, professional media organizations, professional journalistic associations, become more active in terms of trying to put certain codes or certain professional ethics or certain professional standards to be able to say, okay, these are the types of rules and these are the types of guidelines and regulations that we are okay with. We are okay with this, but we are not okay with that, in order to try to avoid the danger of too much government interference and intervention in a way that can completely cut down or destroy freedom of expression and freedom of the press. Mohammed?
Thank you very much.
So please translate both. Translate your question and translate my answer, please.
Yes, sure. Benim sorum şeyle ilgili, dijital güvenlik yasası ile ilgili Bangladeş'te şu an o dijital yasa yani sadece online üzerinden sosyal medya olsun, blog olsun orada bir ifade bir şeyler ifade ederse yani o dijital yasasına göre bir suç oluyor. Bir de tutuklayabiliyor. Yani buna karşı yani gazeteciler ya da medyada çalışanlar ne yapabilir? Bu soruyu sormuştum kendisine. Bununla ilgili cevap olarak da kendisi söyledi yani Arap ülkelerde de cyber suç yasası var. Yani insanlar kendileri doğru ifade edemiyor. Yani ifade özgürlüğü yoktur. Yani tutuklayabiliyor orada da. Bu yüzden kendisi Amerika'daki öğrencilere söylüyor yani siz böyle bir ortamdasınız ki çok şanslısınız yani. Burada özgürlük var. Ama bazı ülkelerde bu kadar özgürlük yok. Yani zor durumdalar. Bu yüzden iktidarda olanları yani diktatör olmak için müsaade etmemeli. Yani yasalar belli olmalı. Yani yasa budur. Bunlar da ifade özgürlüğü bir de gazetecilik için, özgür gazetecilik için yardımcı olmalı.
Thank you, Mohammed. So other questions from the audience? Other questions about the topic of today's lecture or any other topic really that we even covered in the last 2 days that you want to ask about? We talked about Islamophobia, we talked about citizen journalism, we talked about the role of the media in the Arab Spring uprisings, we talked about the pros and cons, positive and negative sides of citizen journalism, media regulation. Any questions about any of these topics?
Herhangi bir konularla ilgili sorularınız varsa sorabilirsiniz. Yani kitle iletişim olsun, sosyal medya olsun, Arap Bahar'la ilgili olsun, medya yasası olsun. Herhangi bir konuda sorularınız varsa sorabilirsiniz.
Any questions? Okay. So if there are no more questions, let me just end by reminding you, I'm going to be sending articles. As I said before, I'm still keeping my promise. I did not forget. I will share the articles with Ms. Khadija, so she can share them with all of you. I'm collecting a group of my publications and articles about the areas of Islamophobia and fighting Islamophobia in cyberspace, and also about digital media, social media, the pros and cons of citizen journalism, all the topics we have been discussing over the last few days. So I'm going to be sending these articles to Ms. Khadija so she can kindly share them with all of you. And I'm here until tomorrow in Erzurum, leaving on Saturday morning. If you have questions, you also have my email. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you so much. And تشكر درم. Shukran. Mohammed, you can translate as well what I said just now.
Yes. Kendisinin 2 tane makale var sosyal medyanın rolüyle ilgili. Bunlar bizimle paylaşacaktır. Bir de kendisi you are going Saturday, right?
I'm leaving Saturday morning, yes.
So you are tomorrow you are there, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yarına kadar burada. Cumartesi günü gidecek. Bu yüzden şey yapabilirsiniz yani sorularınız varsa sorabilirsiniz ya da e-mailden yazabilirsiniz. Bir de makaleler bizimle paylaşacaktır. So Professor Sahar, actually I have some questions, but I will not ask now. I will be in connect with you, maybe through email. Okay, I will be there. I will ask
Absolutely.
you.
Yes, you did an excellent job with the translation, Mohammed. So be sure I'm going to answer your emails and give you also all the help and all the support I can. And I really appreciate your help with the translation back and forth. Thank you so much. And thanks so much to all the team and the group and the staff in Ataturk University for hosting me for this excellent Erasmus scholarship. Thanks to Ms. Khadija for the technical assistance. And thanks to all of you for your attendance and your participation. and take care. Good luck with everything. تشكر درم. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.